What evidence was there that Saddam Hussein had acquired or was trying to acquire a nuclear weapon or was trying to get a chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz?
There was no evidence he had a nuclear weapon, because my judgment is he would have expressed that he had it, and that would have created a real problem. You have to watch that man over 30 years. First of all, let me just say that it's very clear if there were no oil under the sands of Iraq, he would never have gotten the wherewithal, the resources, to effectively threaten his neighbors and essentially, potentially threaten the rest of the world through a global shortage of oil, which he could have done. The evidence I have is I watched him, one, come up against Iran, but moving on Kuwait, threatening Saudi Arabia, and what his actions, as I observed them year after year, led me to conclude he was clearly trying to get control of Middle East oil. Now, the thought of him in control of Middle East oil, and then with his resources being able to buy a nuclear device, I found scary. And indeed, having him out of power was critical to me, whether he was deposed by internal means or by war or anything, was less important to me than he left.
Notwithstanding all of this, the world is a better and safer place because Saddam Hussein is no longer in power and the Iraqi people have been removed from the fear of a terribly sadistic despot.
Absolutely.
And that alone might have made this war justified.
Yeah, it was not the argument that was advanced.
I know
and
that.
I'm not sure that the United States would have been able to persuade some people to go to war in order to do away with the dictator. But it's
because a lot of
clear.
other people might be on that list.
Yes, they could. But it was one of the most horrible regimes that the world has seen, and the competition was pretty hard.
Right.
And it was well known. So I think one should look forward now. That's what I do. We analyze the past, but we should look forward.
It looks like that there has been some benefit from the fact there's been regime change.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And that it might have an impact on the region.
Yes.
Which is probably the reason they wanted to do it in the first place.
Maybe.
They just used the wrong argument.
Well, there were so many arguments. One argument was that they didn't want to have their troops sitting in Saudi Arabia, and they had to have troops in Saudi Arabia, so long as Saddam was a danger. So there are many different arguments. But the one that they given the UN and the US people was on the whole weapons of mass destruction. But I don't doubt that good can come from this. Maybe the peace process will be eased, or maybe you'll have more suicide bombers. I mean, it's too early to draw the balance under this. I hope, like you, that it will come out in a positive way.
Democratization, impact on the conduct of other nations in the region.
It was a horrible regime,
pathwork.
And no one doubts that, and we all knew that before. So that is a clear gain in the balance.
From the early days of the
If you know now the way it's turning out, would you have opposed what happened?
I think the strategic decision was correct. I think the implementation was bad. And maybe my conclusion is there's some things the United States just can't do because we're just not organized to do it. We just can't do it.
Is the world less safe because we went to Iraq?
I think in the short term it's less safe. Over the long term, I think the judgment will remain open. I think 10 years from now it'll be, it's entirely likely that it'll be seen as a correct decision. But it could have been implemented a lot more efficiently.
My question would be very simple. It's asked frequently, it's discussed frequently. Is it your professional judgment that the world is better off with Saddam Hussein now in custody, facing the rule of law?
Well, in my opinion, there was a risk of Saddam Hussein being in charge of a country with that amount of resources and with that amount of potential for both good and evil. What Iraq was under Saddam and the potential of what it could be, there was an enormous difference. The trends, I think, are important. And our analysis in this study was to not look at a single point in time, but to look at dynamics and trends. He clearly had ambitions with respect to weapons of mass destruction. He clearly had a strategy and tactic to get out of the constraints of the UN sanctions. He was clearly making a great deal of progress on that. But for the intervention of the events of 9/11, I think the world would be in a very different position right now.
In conclusion, the world is better off with his now facing in custody the rule of law to account for his crimes.
I'm an analyst, and I realize I'm in a political world right now.
No, it's a
but I have to agree,
straightforward.
analytically, the world is better off.
And I thank you for that straightforward response, and it's predicated on many years of dedicated service.
So based on the information that you have, David, not what we had prior to the war, but you had, in your opinion, was it prudent to go to war? Was there an imminent threat?
I think it was absolutely prudent. In fact, I think at the end of the inspection process, we'll paint a picture of Iraq that was far more dangerous than even we thought it was before the war. It was of a system collapsing. It was a country that had the capability in weapons of mass destruction areas and in which terrorists, like ants to honey, were going after it.
The president described Iraq as a gathering threat, a gathering danger. Was that an accurate description?
I think that's a very accurate description.
But an imminent threat to the United States?
Tom, an imminent threat is a political judgment. It's not a technical judgment. I think Baghdad was actually becoming more dangerous in the last 2 years than even we realized. Saddam was not controlling the society any longer. In the marketplace of terrorism and of WMD, Iraq well could have been that supplier if the war had not entered.
And I think I've said, but let me be absolutely clear about it. Iraq was in clear material violation of 1441. They maintained programs and activities, and they certainly had the intentions at a point to resume their programs. So there was a lot they wanted to hide because it showed what they were doing that was illegal. I hope we find even more evidence of that.
Part of that program were missiles, clearly in defiance of the UN resolution in terms of range. They had the potential to incorporate in those warheads, although small quantities, nevertheless very lethal types of WMD. Am I not correct in that?
You're absolutely correct.
Could you say that the work thus far of the ISG, and I recounted a number of things, including the ricin and so forth, in my opening statement, does not that lend itself to the understanding, the conclusion that Saddam Hussein and this military machine under his control posed an imminent threat, perhaps to the neighbors, perhaps to those beyond the perimeter of the neighbors?
Senator Warner, I think the world is far safer with the disappearance and the removal of Saddam Hussein. I have said, I actually think this may be one of those cases where it was even more dangerous than we thought. I think when we have the complete record, you're going to discover that after 1998, it became a regime that was totally corrupt. Individuals were out for their own protection, and in a world where we know others are seeking WMD, the likelihood at some point in the future of a seller and a buyer meeting up would have made that a far more dangerous country than even we anticipated, with what may turn out not to be a fully accurate estimate.
You answered a question from Reuters. What happened to the stockpiles of biological and chemical weapons that everyone expected to be there? Your answer was simple, quote, I don't think they existed. So what needs to be established here is that when we remove, at least I believe is your view, and certainly mine, that, as you just stated, America, the world, and Iraq is a far better and safer place with Saddam Hussein gone from power. And the sacrifice made by American citizens and that are serving and sacrificing today was not only worth it, but very important to the future of the Middle East and the world. Do you share that?
That's certainly true, Senator. I probably learned not to speak to wire reporters and even to watch out for senators who want one-word answers. Yeah. It tends to compress complex issues.
But you agree with the fundamental principle here that what we did was a justified and enhanced the security of the United States and the world by removing Saddam Hussein from power.
Absolutely.